Hi guys, here's part 2. If you don't want to miss part 3 and 4, please subscribe. Right now I'll be focusing on the mouth area, which is basically the focal point. Trying to get just the colors down and yeah. For the face especially, a lot of the scales I actually drew out instead of using a texture brush or something like that. I was just worried. Sometimes when you use texture brushes and stuff, it doesn't really wrap the form properly and stuff. So when it comes to the focal points, usually I try to draw it out if I can. And it just helps me figure out a few things. Now I'm just trying to phase out the sketch basically and get it to a point where I can paint without it. But on the other hand, you do spend a lot of time with your sketch, so you should use it to the fullest. Like sometimes people take the sketch away too quickly without actually putting in enough detail to where they can move forward effectively. So basically they draw out a sketch and then they spend all this time on the sketch and then they get rid of it too quickly and they lose a lot of information. I did some studies of snake faces and stuff before I did the painting. It really kind of helped. I also had reference open, but yeah, the studies help you understand it a bit better. Sometimes if you're just using reference or something like that, it slows you down quite a lot because you're always having to look at the reference. And if you don't understand what you're doing, you waste a lot of time. Like more time than it would take for you to just stop and go do a quick study. Not sure I really got it right though, but yeah. And here it's just darkening the mouth and keeping the direction of the light in my mind while I painted. Now I use a bit of a better technique in terms of creating lighting and such, but this is what I used back then. Just kind of trying to keep it in mind while I painted. And sometimes you get it wrong or you paint on something too long and the light slowly shifts, but yeah. I was doing maybe too much zooming out without putting enough paint down. I'm trying to use a mixture of texture brushes to get kind of like a scaly feel. Trying to add some texture, basically. Yeah, just some more scale, more texture brushes. I was trying to do some sort of pattern here with the screen layer. I can't remember if I kept it or if I slowly phased it out because it wasn't working. There I think I lost a bit of work. Sometimes it is hard to do videos. If you're not used to them, you do forget sometimes to switch the thing on if you walk away for a bit. Here I was experimenting with the feathers part. I was trying to make it a bit more interesting. And using this perspective lines to draw the other side. Once I was happy with it, I lasted it out just to fill the shapes in. I think at that point I actually noticed that I lost a bit in the file. The lasso tool used properly can save you quite a lot of time. Just adjusting, and I was trying to make it look like feathers. I wasn't very happy with how it turned out. Here I duplicated the feathers in the front and I warped it a bit to give a bit more volume without having to actually go in and work on it like unnecessarily. It's a useful technique when you're creating something with like tons of variety or whatever. When feathers, there's just a lot of them. So you want to do it in the fastest way possible. Yeah, I'm just trying to add some sort of texture to the feathers and bring the value and color to something that doesn't stand out so much. As you can see, I spent a lot of time on the face just trying to make it look right before I started working on the other parts of the image. The face is the main focus, so you want to make sure that it draws the eye and looks the most interesting. Flipping the image regularly will help you spot any issues you might be having. The image is too tilted or the form doesn't read properly. You always need a fresh eye so you can keep making adjustments. Painting the teeth are quite easy. Mainly just use a texture brush and just be mindful of the lighting. I was trying to paint spit in this point, like spit coming from the mouth as it was to show motion, but I ended up scrapping it in the end because I didn't like it. I should do some studies of spit, or I should have got some reference or something because, yeah, I couldn't make it look right, so I ended up just leaving it out. Yeah, it was just strengthening the lighting and giving better contrast to the face, and also in turn lightening a lot around the face so it would stand out more. Here's where I started experimenting with ways of creating the scales, and I tried a few things before I landed on the method I started using, and this is what I decided. I decided to make a texture brush and use it to make kind of like a little grid thing, and with this I just used it and warped it to create convincing scales or something that would hopefully save me some time. As you can see, I'm just trying out a few methods, and when I realized that it wouldn't work, that's when I started warping it instead, and I used the loops that I had already put on the snake's form to make sure that it wrapped. So it was fairly easy actually adding this. It's kind of like a happy accident. Like, I used the circles to help me better understand the 3D space and the tapering of the snake's body, but it actually played quite well into the scales and helped me wrap the form a lot better. So that went well. And this really plays into the thing that I use the warp tool quite a bit. And it really just depends on the problem. You're always just trying to find solutions, and this was what I came up with. At this point in time, I was actually quite enjoying the way the image was coming out, and I hadn't found an issue yet that really stumped me or slowed down my progress. A lot of it was quite fluid, and it's nice when an image just flows and you don't have any halting stops because there's something you don't understand or you can't get around. I've had my fair share of those kinds of images, and they're always hard, always difficult to complete. I wanted to wrap the form as much as possible, but at the same time I didn't want to waste too much time on it. So I tried to get it as close to what it would look like without having to waste tons of time. So as you can see, the loops that I made before really helped. Made it a lot faster, I feel. Or maybe just me taking so much time to wrap the snake in scales was maybe not the best or most or fastest or needed thing. Because a lot of this detail can be suggested, but I went the very literal way, and that isn't always the best. Here I realized I actually flipped the belly the wrong way. So I was wrapping the scales on the wrong side, and at that point I realized and I started fixing it. Here, just adding a bevel to give it a bit more form. Very quick way of adding a little bit more volume, especially when you're doing scales. It really helps since there's so many scales on such a large creature, or any creature for that matter, which has scales. As layers aren't needed anymore, you see I merge them down to keep my layer count as low as possible. Here just adding more texture again with just random texture brushes and adding in the main part of it. The creature had to have like weird feathers going along its body, and this was basically my solution. At this point the image is really starting to come together. A lot of it reads quite well, and a little past this point, when I'm finished the city, it just becomes rendering and fixing certain issues, but mostly rendering. All the hard stuff's really done. The sketch was done, the perspective was handled, and then the rendering is just time consuming. That's really where a lot of the time of finishing any image comes into play. And I guess there's a lot of faster ways to complete images. Something I am practicing is trying to keep the whole image vague and just focus on the focal points. That is a technique that a lot of artists use, and I feel it's quite effective because it also helps strengthen the focal points if the rest of the image is less detailed or blurry or such. When I was painting these images especially, what I would do is just detail everything and then at the end blur certain areas, which is kind of counterproductive because you're putting in all the detail then you're blurring it. In some ways it does create a better blurred look because there is detail there before it's blurred, but it is a big waste of time. When you're painting and stuff, and especially for commercial work, you always want to find ways to cut on your time, but still keep the same quality of work. So that's something you always need to be thinking about as well when you're painting. That is one nice point about doing videos of your paintings. As I'm watching this, I am seeing a lot of things that I did wrong or that I could have done faster or better, or stuff that I shouldn't have really wasted time on. So that's very helpful in itself. As I said before, I haven't done really much studies of buildings, and the value I put on the light side was a bit too light at this point. Like much further on, I do darken it. Here I'm just trying to find a texture that would suggest bricks, like a brick kind of texture, cobblestone-ish. I was having a bit of trouble, so you see I go through a few brushes and I try a few things before I find something I like. But still I keep the texture of the previous brushes just to add more variation. I can't quite remember what I went with for the brick texture. As you can see, I was having quite a lot of trouble with the roof, trying to find the right value, and it just kept looking wrong, and I wasn't sure what I was doing wrong. So after playing with it a little bit, I go back to the building. Still looking for the right kind of brush. Then I found a brush that could maybe work. And I think this is what I stuck with. Again, just making like a tile and then warping it to match the form, and just using different layer modes to see if I found something I like. So a lot of this was using a lot of experimentation. And it's always good to paint over any textures that you add, like tile textures with brushes and stuff, because you can see it looks like you just put a texture brush on a surface or something like that. So you always have to do a little refining on the top just to merge it properly. Once I felt that the tower was reasonably complete, or I was happy with it at this stage, I decided to start moving on to the rest of the image so I could get it approved and continue with the final rendering. Here I made a grid just showing the direction of the light and what parts the snake would block. I'd like to thank everyone for watching part 2. Part 3 will be out in a few days. Thanks everyone for coming. I hope this was helpful. Bye.